Thank you. Well, got a young crowd here, just as I was expecting, right? So what I'm going to do is talk about changing Clarion. I wonder what that means. Does it mean how Clarion changed, or how we can change Clarion? Or, well, let's just see. Let's begin with this. How many people know where this house is? Pretty much everybody. It's a very famous house across from the Catholic Church on Main Street. 720 Main Street is probably the best name for it now. Although a lot of the old-timers, such as myself, would call it the Arnold House or the Weaver House. This is what it looked like Tuesday. Before it was empty, which is what it is now, it housed designing minds. This picture was taken in 2006. Now, it's about the time they moved in, I think, so they were there 9 years or so. And they've moved away because this house is maybe not going to be there too much longer. Before it was designing minds, it was looking pretty sad. This is back in 1976 when I started collecting these match shot pictures. My wife and I find old pictures of buildings that still exist today and revisit them occasionally and take the same picture to see how buildings age, all right? So you'll notice the house was painted white back then, and it snowed back in those days. It had trees in front, and at this point in time, or shortly thereafter, it was Irma's Place, which sold antiques. How many people remember Irma's Place? Yeah, very good. At some point before it was Irma's Place, it was the Weaver House, okay? There was a judge here in Clarion, Lloyd Weaver, who became a judge in 1950, and I suspect lived in this house. Certainly his parents bought this house in 1915, and that was John Weaver and his wife, and they had a hardware store on Main Street in Clarion. All right, so this we'll call the Weaver House, if you will. If we go back a little further, it becomes the Arnold House in 1905, and things are looking pretty good. Look here, these are all Arnolds. This is the widow of the Arnold that built the house. She was his second wife. We'll get to him. And this is the whole clan on the front porch. Notice the lions on the gate here. Notice the hitching post. This is in 1905. So there still would have been horses, right? The auto hadn't quite arrived in Clarion at this point. If we go back another step to 1877, which is when the Illustrated Atlas of Clarion County was published, there's a few differences. There's no porch at the back here, but this summer kitchen, there for all its years. Many people wondered, when was this house built? This house was built in 1856, at the same time that the Arnold block was built. This was G.W. Arnold's home, and he built a big block of offices at the same time called the Arnold block, which is still there today. So if you were going to say, well, this house can't be torn down because the man who built it is so famous, you'd have to ask yourself, well, why is he so famous? So let's have a look at G.W. Arnold. G.W. Arnold, he was born on a farm in York County and led a farm boy's existence. His father had some education and saw to it that all his sons were educated as well. So G.W. was an assistant in the public schools at the age of 16. He then moved to Carthus Furnace, which is over in Clearfield County, and he worked there as a teamster and a weighmaster and gave good service, evidently. But he moved on to Strattonville in 1840 and worked at the Lowry store over in Strattonville. It's gone now. Also over there, he was in the hotel business for a brief period of time. And in 1846, he moved to Clarion and opened a dry goods store. Somehow, he parlayed this dry goods store into fame and fortune. I don't understand it. Maybe it's who he married, Hannah Smith. They had 2 boys and a girl. In 1858, he was involved in starting the Clarion Fair Association. When I was a kid, they still had the old fairgrounds out here. Well, he's one of the guys that got that started. They had horse races back there in the old days, and then they switched to automobile races, and then there was a roller skating rink. The college eventually bought it, and that was the end of all that. In 1856, he built his house and also the Arnold block. In 1860s, somehow he'd come by money because he and 3 other men purchased the old turnpike that ran from Brookville to Franklin. He owned 322. Can you imagine? He was the director and one of the founding members of the First National Bank in Clarion, became their first cashier, and by the end of his life was president of the bank. He was evidently a masterful financier. If you wanted a loan at the First National Bank, that's the man you talk to, okay? He was a trustee and treasurer of Carrier Seminary. He gave the college its first chunk of land. He spearheaded community efforts to get the thing rolling. When the seminary faded away and became the Clarion State Normal School, he was also involved in that. He promoted and was responsible for getting a spur line from the Pittsburgh and Western Railroad. He's active in his church, the Methodist Church. His first wife died, and he died in 1896, and his obit, I like his obit. A long, useful, and honored life is closed. Clarion has lost one of her foremost citizens. G.W. Arnold built his house in 1856, but he wasn't first on the scene. Clarion began 1841, the first people arrived, and by 1845 it looked more or less like this. Has Clarion changed since these days? Well, I should say, this is the first courthouse. This is the first jail. This went down in 1859, this around 1870, late 1870s or so. But this little row of houses here lasted for an inordinately long period of time. It was called Gilmore's Row. There was a up-and-coming young lawyer that came to Clarion in 1841, and he's going to make a name for himself. His father was a judge down in Butler. His brother was a hotshot lawyer down in Butler, and they both sent him up here and told him to make a name for himself. So he came up and he wangled a position in the early county government. He was the first district attorney. And he had some money, and he built this substantial office right here. Have you ever been to the farmer's market in Clarion? That's where his office sat, okay? And it looked like this around 1900 or so, okay? So he had grand plans, but he didn't get reelected district attorney and fled back to Butler. And that's the last we saw of him. There was, however, a man that liked the look of this office, and his name was Sweeney, James Sweeney. Sweeney was born in Uniontown, apprenticed as a cabinet maker, moved to Clarion the very first year it was in existence, probably figuring lots of cabinet work in a brand new town. That's why all these lawyers were pouring in too. Lots of work for lawyers, lots of deeds to do, lots of money flowing around. He was elected Justice of the Peace just 3 years later and served for 16 years. Around 1854, he bought Gilmore's old law office. In 1865, Clarion had pretty much reached the size and wasn't changing so much. If you look at this picture, you'll see that Main Street's pretty well filled up. And Wood Street was doing all right. Liberty Street was a wasteland. And South Street was even worse, okay? So the town was really centered around this central area, say from 4th Avenue up to 7th on Main Street. And everybody lived along Main Street and walked down to 5th and Main to the courthouse or to their office or to their store to work. We don't have any pictures of Clarion for a long, long time until we get this beauty. This old picture has some goodies. You see that? That is the second courthouse. Remember I told you the first one burnt in 1859? This one was built to replace it. All right, there's the second courthouse. Here's the Honey Building on Tuesday, okay? It was the Second National Bank of Clarion, okay? Who started the First National Bank of Clarion? G.W. That's right, G.W. Arnold, right. Somebody thought we needed another bank. Notice the porches, notice all the horses and buggies, notice no fire escape, good luck to you. Also on that, we have the Arnold block. The Arnold block is here. It's where Ulysses is. Also in that picture is the Presbyterian Church. Back then, it had a spire. And, of course, the jail. Let's look at the foreground of this picture. What's going on here? Well, this, I believe, is a maid, just because of that big apron. And I think this is a young man making eyes at a young woman. These are kids sitting on the ground down here. And this is the girl down here that's either faced towards these two or away. I can't quite decide. So I began asking myself, well, where was this taken from? And finally I decided, well, there's one surefire way. If I can find any of these buildings, I should be all right. And the one I found was this one. The people living in that house, I bet they don't know they're living in a house that existed in 1876. And furthermore, it was surrounded by cow fields. All these are fenced-in pastures for the cows to graze. Something for the boys to do when they got up in the morning, drive the cows out to the fields. So, where's that building? Anybody know? This is the corner of 3rd and South. There's a church there. That's the most distinguishing characteristic of the corner. The house we're talking about is right down here. Okay? Instead of the 2nd courthouse peeping through, we have the 3rd courthouse peeping through. So what that means is this is 3rd Avenue in 1876. And between these two fences here is South Street, running down right in front of this house. So have things changed? Now tell me this, are you conservatives or progressives? Do you think it would be better if things were the same?
No.
Oh, think of the tourism we could get. You know, we had people getting off I-80 to come to Clarion, dress up in 1870s garb and stay at the Arnold block with no electricity. It'd be easy to take care of them, give them nothing. No doctor around, no elevators, no nothing. We'd have crowds. Okay, so this is Clarion before the oil boom, all right? And really it was a dusty, quiet little town. It was originally built because they needed a county seat for Clarion County, and Clarion County came in existence because of the power of the iron masters. There used to be many iron furnaces around. Unfortunately, about the time Clarion got moving, 1841, another 10 years saw the demise of almost every furnace in the county. So we were going to ride to the bank on the backs of the iron furnace population, and that all went away. But it's still the county seat, so there's still business for lawyers, and there's business for merchants, and there's business for milliners to make the hats for the lawyers' wives, and there's girls who are looking to marry a lawyer. So, you know, it's chugging along, but it's just a quiet country kind of a place. It needed another exciting thing to happen. This is what the map of Clarion looked like in 1877, and I can't easily compare the two, but it hasn't changed that much. Mostly Main Street. A little bit more on Wood Street than before, and just a tad on Liberty and South. It really hasn't boomed, hasn't blossomed yet. All right, so to this point, the history of Clarion County is all very murky. They had newspapers, but they've all been lost. You can't come by them. Fortunately, from now on, the Historical Society has them all. So I'm going to read you stuff from the newspapers. First of all, there was great indignation that the commissioners might want to do a tax rate hike. That wouldn't happen today. Clarion citizens tired of muddy streets asked council to macadamize Main Street. It was all still dirt streets in 1891. Clarion Borough split 3-3 on a vote to banish cows from the town center. Can you imagine the outrage if you had a building at the back of your lot where you kept your cow and you had a maid who milked the cow and that was your milk, and suddenly you weren't going to have cows? So, all right, conservatives, progressives, do we get rid of the cows or not? How many want to get rid of the cows? Nobody wants to get rid of the cows. Excellent. So it passed later that year. So no more cows in Clarion Borough. They put the new electrical system for homes and stores and offices into action in 1895. It worked like a charm, and the editor commented, its use promises to become pretty general. In 1896, someone took the time to draw a panoramic view of Clarion Town. By 1896, we'd been through the oil boom. Lots of money floating around, which is why the courthouse is as beautiful as it is. How many people think we should get rid of the courthouse? See? That's Clarion, that courthouse, it's Clarion. 1896, it was sitting there because it was built around 1883, I think. Behind it, here's the first jail. Here, what's that? That's the Honey Building. Notice this whole half block down to the Masons. It hasn't changed since 1896. Lots of other holes, though. So this is your panoramic map of 1896. My wife and I set ourselves a challenge 6 weeks ago. We decided to get a copy of this map, print it out, and go looking for each and every one of these houses and see whether it was still there today. This kept us busy for about a week and a half, and we came up with this map. This is a detail. The green ones are still there. They were there in 1896. But what's in red, and you see vast numbers have disappeared. If you count every structure that's on here, you come up with 704. The number remaining is 33%. 2/3 are gone. However, most of the ones that have disappeared are cowsheds. At least I take them to be cowsheds. Okay?
Hey, what's right across from the old Catholic church up there? That big building.
There is the old high school.
Wow, that's a big building.
Yeah, I have a picture of that. We'll get to it.
Wow.
This is Science Hall up here. The churches, I always get confused. One is Presbyterian and one is Methodist. Okay, onward. More reading. Amidst loud objections from some county taxpayers, the monument in the park was built. Now, I thought this was because they were destroying what was the playground of Clarion. That park was called the Diamond in the old days, and it's where ball games and pugilistic matches and girlfriends met their boyfriends, and there's a fence around it. Cows grazed there. It had been the center of the community for 50 years plus. And suddenly it was going to become a monument to these soldiers, and furthermore, the county is going to spend tax money to build the monument. Well, I thought people would be complaining about the loss of the recreational space, but really they were only concerned about the money spent in their hard-earned tax money on a monument. However, did it get built? It sure did, and still stands there today. 1898, Clarion Borough Council approved installation of electric street lights, so some conservatives thought less costly gas lights were good enough. Who wants electric lights? Good. So you're all progressives all of a sudden here. August 27th, most everybody turned out to see the light switched on, so I guess the Borough Council got its way. Clarion hired a policeman, high time, 1904, and warned that ordinances governing fast driving would be strictly enforced. Horsemen driving faster than 8 miles an hour on any borough street would be fined $5. So $5 back then would be, okay, about $100 in today's money. Around 1910, well, the oil boom had gone away and things had simmered down. The college was growing slowly, but not mammothly. We needed some industry, and some local businessmen went out and got this glass plant going. This is the Pearl Glass Company. Okay? They went bankrupt in about 10 years, but were bought out by, Bernie Bond. Very good. And then Bernie Bond eventually morphed into Owens, Illinois. All right? So the glass plant was very good for the community in terms of money flowing in. The payroll from these glass plants was enormous. Houses were built up all along Grand Avenue, and that stretched back in there behind the college. And there used to be streets where the Nanatorium and Marwick Boyd are, used to be street after street of worker housing. And all of that was built on the back of the success of the glass plants. And it made Clarion a lively place. You had the university. Still wasn't very big, but it was there. And people valued it was Clarion State College back then. And for a dynamo of industry, you had the glass plant, and then you had the lawyers up in the courthouse as well. That sounds pretty good. 1907, paving of Main Street from 3rd to 9th. If the road went past your lot, you were assessed $240. You pay me to pave that street, Main Street. $240 is about $4,500 today. How many people want to pay $4,500 to pave the street? You want mud? You'll take mud. Okay. See, conservative here in the front row. 3 Clarion houses were burglarized in one night. An editor noted it might be well to consider additional police force, all-night electric light, and a telephone service. So, this is in 1907. Time to get the telephones going. Everybody agree on that? Yeah, okay. Electric service all night. You know, they used to turn it off. How many people want all-night electricity? Progressives, one and all. Okay. A Chautauqua program in Clarion included concerts, lectures, drama, and opera by the Dean Grand Opera Company. Also, the evangelical revolution that occurred back in the first quarter of the 20th century hit Clarion very hard. We had a huge tabernacle holding 1,200 people built on Wood Street. It ran for 6 weeks. Stores closed early every evening. The town's pool rooms did the same. 770 persons were converted in the greatest religious campaign in the county's history. Remember Squire James Sweeney, how he became a judge and gave his office to his son? So here we are in 1924, 53 years later, and Squire John Sweeney still, on a warm day, sitting out in front of his office. So let me tell you a little about him. He was born in Clarion. He was a teamster using his father's wagon. Remember, there was, for a time, no rail link into Clarion from the railroad station, so all the dry goods stores and merchants needed to get their stuff over. So teamstering was a worthwhile profession. Wouldn't it be fun driving a horse and wagon up and down the river hill in the old days? Well, it must have been miserable. And also there was a toll bridge at the bottom, owned by G.W. Arnold. He enlisted in the Union Army. He was wounded at Bull Run. Got away with that. It was just an arm wound, and he was back in action in a couple months. But then at Antietam, he caught one in the foot. For some reason, they never removed it, and the foot was never amputated. He lived with it all his life, but he didn't put any weight on it. He used a crutch. You can see it right there. My suspicion is that it made him a crabby man. I'm not sure, but we have some evidence for that. He was elected Justice of the Peace when his father retired to become a judge. At the same time, John Sweeney became Justice of the Peace. So if you were in Clarion, if you were going before a court, there's a pretty good chance you're going to be involved with a Sweeney, one way or the other. A Justice of the Peace back then wasn't a salaried position. He made his money off of fees. He would marry people. He would notarize wills. Small legal business. You can think of a Justice of the Peace as being a small court for small business. Judgments up to $300 might be rendered by him. If the judgment was for less than $5.88, you couldn't appeal it to the regular courts. So here was this guy hurting every day from this wound. He never married. His house was down the street where Flynn's Tires is now. His parents lived there, but he moved out. And he lived in hotels all his life. Then he evidently moved around from hotel to hotel. You got to read between the lines, but I get the impression this was a cranky old guy, okay? In 1883, when they were building the new courthouse, they were erecting the statue up on top of the courthouse. And to do that, they had to have a big cable that came down, and it went up above his building. But they didn't ask his permission, and this so angered him that he vowed he would never enter the new courthouse. And in all the 43 years that he was involved as Justice of the Peace, he only went in once when he was dragged in by officers of the court over something. He was a hoarder before there was a name for it. He had legal papers all over, and he knew just which stack to lift up to find money to make change for his clients. Every surface was covered with papers except above the stove. In 1896, his office was robbed, and part of the account was sort of a tongue-in-cheek account of what his office looked like. Remember, he was a teamster in his early days. I don't know if the wagon was his father's wagon, but a wagon ended up in the front yard of his office. And gradually the bed of it rotted away, so it was just a frame, no bed in the wagon. And a tree got started and grew for 30 years up through the bed. And people used to come to Clarion to see this tree growing up through the wagon bed. This is like a two-headed cow back then. Okay, so after 53 years, that's a long time, he retired as Justice of the Peace, and 2 years later he died. His building was sold. it was raised and it became a service station. So, 1927, died eminently fair in the conduct of business, never allowing his personal likes or dislikes or the fact of friend or enemy to interfere with his decisions. 1919, they dammed an old logging dam across the mouth of Toby Creek to make a swimming pool. What's down there now? Alpha rock, gamma rock, delta rock. What are we calling it these days? 1921, the fire siren was installed. I wish they would deinstall it one of these days. I think that's what drives people from Clarion, that horrible, horrible siren. The new roller rink was begun in 1921. 1923, the courthouse was wired for electric lights. People complained. Trade Expansion Week, if you read my book, Toby's Curse, it has a chapter about Trade Expansion Week when Clarion's aviators flew around in the sky, and you'd go to the fire hall. You would buy a red balloon filled with helium, and then you would go release that at a given time. And the aviators would run around the sky up there popping the balloons. Everybody thought it was cool. 1929, this is what Clarion looked like. Seminary Hall was hanging in there. Built in 1867. It wasn't the oldest building in town. The Arnold Block was and is the oldest big building in town. But it was doing all right. This is the aerial photo, and you can see here's Seminary Hall here. Here's the old boys' dorm. This is old science called now. I think it was called science back then. It wasn't a big campus. It just wasn't. Okay, it was Clarion College, or Clarion State Teachers College. 1925, state police in plain clothes raided 2 Clarion pool rooms and arrested their owners on charges of possessing gambling devices. In another raid, a Clarion baker was arrested for possession of liquor. So this is a good way to get a crowd to come, have something illegal, and then people will come to Clarion and partake of it. 1933, finally, Clarion Borough gets 24-hour police protection. Excellent. More than 700 indignant area residents had a mass meeting to protest the rumored closing of Clarion State College. Would you have been there? Boy, I would have been. That's part of what makes Clarion Clarion is the college up there. And the courthouse at the other end and Main Street. Tempers flared. County Commissioner's Office. Harvey J. Mitchell charged fellow Commissioner E.O. Lurch with attacking him, beating him about the head, and causing him to be cut by shoving him against a window, which broke. That's a commissioner's meeting. Traffic control lights were placed at 5th and Main and 8th and Main in an effort to cut auto accident rates. That's in 1936. Can you believe it? They're still there. And people still occasionally get hit at those intersections. Clarion got new street signs. I was surprised by this because several were donated by civic organizations. Things weren't necessarily viewed as a function of government. Judson C. Burns of Philadelphia, former Clarion resident, offered the entrance gateway for the cemetery. You know, that pretty good gateway into the cemetery. Guy gave it to us. Nobody campaigned for anything. Clarion Borough marked the centennial of its founding with a week-long program of varied events. Parking meters were installed along Main Street. It's true they put them in, but the merchants on Main Street were ballistic about it, saying it would drive away trade. Do we still have parking meters? Yeah. Do the merchants still complain about them? They do occasionally complain about them. Up into the 1940s, another goodie. This is a very poor picture of it, but this is the Anderson Hotel on the right. Just beyond it is Smathers, another oldie but goodie. Been there forever, okay? 3rd Courthouse. I'd love to walk down that street, wouldn't you? Yeah. Would you like to be stranded back then? I mean, you think times were better in the old days, right? Well, these are the old days. You wouldn't do it? Parker Kramer bought the old fairgrounds and wanted to make it into some place they wanted to call Clarion Park as a memorial to the county's men and women who served in all wars. I think that's an excellent idea. On Memorial Day, Clarion Park was formally dedicated. Good for them. More than 5,000 spectators came to the first motorboat races ever held in the Clarion River. This is a feature of my youth. Do you remember the motorboat races? Theo Wilson gave Healand Furnace to the county. Thousands thronged to Clarion for the Chamber of Commerce's 2-day autumn leaf festival back in 1954. That was the first one. And here, what's the name of this building?
Arnold.
The Arnold Block is the right way to say it, I believe, okay? And there is Ray's Record Shop. We used to have these dances in the Ross every Saturday night, and we'd go up to Ray's Record Shop and buy the latest records each week and come down and dance around on Saturday nights. How many have ever been to a Ross dance? Oh, not bad, not bad. This is the old Haskell building. There's something for drunk drivers in there now. I'm not quite sure what's in there, you know?
Probation office.
Okay, there we go. But back in the day, this was Arnold Brothers, the biggest store in Clarion. You'd think that'd be G.W. Arnold, but it wasn't. He had a brother named Manasseh. Manasseh came to Clarion. He was 17 years younger than G.W. And they were both involved in this store. It was mammoth. They had like 75 employees. 1955, we got public telephone booths. The parking lot behind the bank, the First Seneca, the Citizens Trust Company, PNC now, was opened. The Historical Society was formed in 56. The firemen used to have this tract of land down at the mouth of Toby. I don't know what became of it either. One-way traffic on Wood and Liberty. The county commissioners saying, we want I-80 as close as we can get it to our town. It'll be the making of our town. So how many people want I-80? 2 or 3. We'd be isolated. We'd be Franklin, essentially, without I-80. And Franklin's nice, don't get me wrong. Franklin has a park worth talking about. Okay, the old Main Street School was torn down. I'll show you a picture. The Clarion Area School donated the land for the swimming pool. Notice community involvement. The school didn't have to do that. First major repair project on Old Seminary Hall in 1957. The problem was they found bad situation once they took the covers off things. 1960, State Health Department ordered closing of the Clarion Borough dump, which used to be down across the street from the Comet Market, and you knew when you passed by because you could smell it. Then Dr. James Gemmell, Penn State University faculty, was named the Clarion State College. Gemmell oversaw the vast development of the university. The tearing down of a lot of small houses where Merriwick Boyd and the security offices, Wilson Avenue. I had friends that lost their houses along Main Street. All that was taken to handle the growth of Clarion University, which was growing because of the baby boom, okay? And somehow the state was really pouring money into Clarion. It grew by leaps and bounds. This is the old high school. What sits there today is Northwest Bank. This thing was a wreck. Northwest Bank is neat and tidy, and I sort of like it. Would anybody agree? Okay. We're getting there. This list stops one more page after this. So, Clarion State College, enrollment leaped. Governor Lawrence signed tons of money for us. He came to the Autumn Leaf Festival one year. The urban redevelopment program, would you believe Clarion had an urban redevelopment program, is what they used to eminent domain all the houses they needed for the campus. There were protests. There was outrage. It still happened. The old fairgrounds was taken over by the state, and that became the stadium that it is today. New mercury vapor lamps brightened Main Street. So did you like the old lamps better, or do you like the mercury vapor? I don't like them because they're orange, but I'm old-fashioned. Cable came to Clarion in 1965, and that spelled the end. Instead of going out and helping the community and going to talks at the library and being part of Clarion, everybody became part of the nation. You know, everybody was glued to the TV, still are. We've got the internet now. The Republican and the Democrat merged. They used to provide contrasting views on things. One was very much Republican and one was very much Democrat. The Republicans, over the years, their philosophy changed, but it was sort of pro-business. Okay, they would write articles about businesses and their successes and their problems, whereas the Democrat tended to be more interested in civic meetings and union goings-on, things like that. Now we have a unified view of things, the Clarion News. 1968, Keystone Shortwave came. Finally, in 68, sort of the end of the era, the end of this set of slides, Seminary Hall was pulled down. So that brings us to Mrs. Donut. Okay? Mrs. Donut, think where Pendragon is. You know where Pendragon is? Mm-hmm. That's where Mrs. Donut used to sit. It was originally the Alexander House. The Alexanders, this alley right across here was the Arnold House. This is it in 1905. This is abandoned. And it just sat there for years like that. All the porches had rotted off. There wasn't glass in the windows. It was just sad, but it was sort of spooky. And then the sign went up in the front yard that said, future site of Mr. Donut. And the college kids took to calling it Mrs. Donut. So that's the name. I always remember it. And then it was torn down, and it became a Dunkin' Donut. And then that went out of business, and then it's been Pendragon since at least 2003. They're still pulling them down, too. This was in the paper today. On 3rd Avenue, I mean, this one deserved to come down. It was condemned. There wasn't historical about it. It wasn't even 100 years old. Okay. Nice picture, though. And they're still building new things. I went to the grand opening of Suites on Main last week. This is the buildings that the college had just built along East Main Street. And everybody's been scratching their head. Some people have been dead set against it. And some people are saying, well, it's a great thing. You grow or you die, or it's going to kill us. So I went to the grand opening, and, I mean, this is what it feels like to be down there. They call it Suites on Main, which I think is an unhandy name. I like Clarion's Canyon, or the Canyon. No? How about the tunnel? How about the Gulch? Or if some college student steps out across crossing and gets whacked, it's going to be called Death Valley. I like it, I find. It's a space with a different feel. And that brings us full circle, back to the Arnold-Weaver House. You ought to walk down there soon and stand on the front porch. Look out on Main Street and try and imagine what that same street looked like 150 years ago. Peek into the windows, and then walk around to the side of the building and find the little passageway that leads to the backyard. Sit down on the bench back there and stare up at the old house and ponder its fate.